Perfect, and there we are. Hello, Tim. How are you?
Hey, George. I'm doing well. Good to see you
Yeah,
this
well,
fine
maybe it's
afternoon.
fine in California, not so much here in Ottawa, Canada, where it's cold and rainy. But it's a fun afternoon because we're here going to be talking about a lot of cool stuff, and mostly talking about doing live production between Epiphan Pearls and Wowza, which is why you're here, Tim, to tell us all about Wowza. So I'm really excited for that. Of course, we still have a lot of people joining us. I still see those viewer numbers ticking up. So we'll just hang out for a minute or two and wait for a few people to get settled in. Just some housekeeping items for people, of course, is, say hi in chat, say where you're from if you feel like it. We will have some polls going up throughout today's webinar. The first poll should be up there now, just asking, what sort of sector you're in, what sort of business are you in. This is helpful information for us with the other polls to understand, what sectors are trying to do what. And as we've discovered over the past 6 months, basically, people's needs for video and live streaming have started to evolve very rapidly. And so it's interesting to see who's doing what and how, or what they still might need help with, which is exactly why we're here today. So there'll be a number of polls. I'll try and shout those out when we put them up. Weigh in on those in the polls section of Crowdcast. Answering the question in chat, of course, won't actually be weighed. And later on, we will also do some Q&A with you guys. So if you have questions, you can put them into chat, but better to put them in the Q&A panel section of Crowdcast. And there's an upvote function of that as well. So if you see that someone else has asked a question that you are interested in, use that upvote, Reddit style. That'll put it to the top of the list. So that when we get to the Q&A part, I will see that and prioritize that based on upvotes. So we'll take a look at that later. A few more people trickling in. But today's webinar is going to be all about live event production with Pearl and Wowza. And we're extremely lucky to have Tim joining us from Wowza to talk all about that side. And of course, for anybody who's been on one of our webinars before, I will blabber on at length about Pearl. So we'll just maybe give it another bit here. Those numbers are still ticking up a little bit. So, but Tim, how are you? I think you're staying safe from natural disasters down there.
You mentioned earlier that it's cold and rainy in Ottawa. It's hot and smoky out here in California. It's a desperate situation, truly. So if I seem a little off today, it's because last night I felt like I was literally living inside of a sepia photo. So wishing the best for, of course, first responders, people out there trying to put those fires out. But it's good to be here, George. Truly, the Epiphan product is, in my mind, one of the finest encoders to interact with. I feel very privileged to be here with you, and we're going to be playing with the Legos today, so to speak. We're going to actually make some connections, and I'm looking forward to it. It's always fun to take product A and hook it into product B and see if it works. And we're silly enough to do it live in front of people. So here goes nothing, right, George?
Tim, you've joined us before to talk with how, for years now, Epiphan Pearl hardware, people use it with Wowza all the time. We have a lot of joint customers, which is always fantastic to hear from those customers. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But one of the things that's certainly newer for Pearl and Wowza, you guys have been doing it for a little while as well, is SRT. So we're definitely going to be looking at doing some SRT connections today, which I think a lot of people are really interested in. I had some conversations with some other customers early this morning in Europe who were very interested in SRT and what that can bring to the table for essentially, live event production in this new AV world we find ourselves in. So we're going to kind of dive into there. So I think we're going to get started here in a second. We have a few people saying hi in chat. We have Michael from Cambridge, Mass. You saying hi in chat. He's the social media manager for a church, and I suspect Wowza has a lot of customers like that. We have some people saying hi from Toronto, and some other people saying hi from Estonia. So people from all over the place. So feel free, say hi in chat. And again, any questions you have, throw them into chat, throw them into the QA panel, and we will get those. If I see something that's really, really relevant to a particular section that we're in, I might jump into it there, but otherwise we'll kind of save those more towards the end. So perfect. Well, let's get into it, Tim. So maybe we'll just do the quick introductions. Epiphan Video, for those of you not familiar, we make hardware products for live streaming, recording, production, and all those kind of things. If you're here for this webinar, you've probably seen a little bit of stuff about Epiphan and certainly the Pearls. Wowza, maybe Tim, give us the Wowza, give us the pitch.
Wowza Media Systems, we are the conduit that delivers video. We do that through a managed service, and then we have hosted software that powers just about everything we do. So we take the video that's contributed from a product like an Epiphan Pearl 2, and we get it wherever you need it. And it can be very custom. It can be very simple and effective. So we are the distribution guys, and we welcome any challenge that anyone has as far as how do I get this video in front of somebody. So it's really what we're about.
So to give you guys a rundown of what today's agenda is going to look like, we're going to start out with me talking a little bit about the keys of professional quality live events, live streaming those events. We'll talk a little bit about SRT, a protocol that we're going to kind of focus on today. And then we'll really get into the hands-on of what do we do to connect a Pearl to Wowza, and what can Wowza do for us to really deliver that high-quality content. And then we'll get into the Q&A after that. Ultimately, the main thing we want to focus on to start with is these days, everyone's trying to pivot into doing things online. Pandemic has kind of accelerated that, but this was a trend that was already happening. So while the pandemic has accelerated it, this would be inevitable, I think, regardless. And both here at Epiphan and Tim, I know you and I have chatted about it. At Wowza, you've been seeing those same trends for the past couple of years. And so we're really excited to help enable people do that. But it starts with some foundations, and that's really making sure that you start with really good professional quality video and audio and using gear that's going to help you produce that. So high quality video is a big one. There's a lot of ways that you can deliver high quality video, but the main way that we want to look at that to start with is getting beyond using webcams oftentimes and using real cameras. And of course, real cameras come in all shapes and sizes. But of course, if your video quality is really high, you also want to make sure that you have really high quality audio. And you probably want to have some level of good professional production to that. And so that's where video production systems like a Pearl come into play. And then we also need a way to reliably deliver that content. So our content distribution, that's where Wowza comes into play. And the connections between all these things, we need really reliable protocols like SRT. So many pieces to this puzzle.
Definitely. One thing I'm noticing, George, is as technology evolves, they become more. Some of these technologies become more affordable, and it's impressive to me how great a camera you can get in a $2,000 to $3,000 range, and I think it's something that shouldn't be overlooked. The best image you can afford, the best sound audio you can afford is just so optimal. It makes such a difference. And again, I know we have someone joining us from a church social media directorship, and that particular sector, I think you would be surprised with the resources you already have, and then certainly the affordability. But we want to channel that quality and that skill into a video stream that your viewers
absolutely,
can
and
enjoy.
not to pick on our church viewers out there, but it pains me because I talk to so many prospective customers coming from that industry, and I ask them what they're using currently to live stream their services, and they say, oh, we stuck an iPad up in the back of the church and go to Facebook directly with just that. And I mean, that is absolutely not what we're talking about when we're talking about high quality video. Smartphones and tablets have come a long, long way in the past number of years, but they're still ultimately very limited in terms of what you can do with the cameras that are built into them. And so when we start to break out of that, and we start to look at what I often say is real cameras, again, as you said, Tim, you don't have to spend a fortune on this. You don't have to go to buy a Red or something crazy. You can do a lot with a very minimal budget, and making sure you maximize what money and budget you do have. There's something there. So a great example would be, you could look at mirrorless cameras that you may already own. So for example, what I use here at home is I use a Sony a5100, very small, very inexpensive mirrorless camera. And I use that as my webcam through capture cards and things like that. But I also use it to go into my Pearl, which then I can stream into a production system remotely, which is what we're doing for today's webinar. And that allows me to really elevate the quality of what I can do. That's not an expensive camera. And there's other manufacturers like Canon and so on that have similar models. That's a great entry point. And it's something that you may already own because you just like photography. And you can kind of go up from there. Many churches, and I'm sure you've seen this, Tim, will go the route of the PTZ cameras, because in a larger space where they need the flexibility of movement, really high quality optical zooms, getting a 20, 30x PTZ camera can go a long, long way to improving that and mounting it in a fixed position, but still having the freedom of movement. And those can be, more money, but not breaking the bank at all.
Yeah, and a couple things I would key in on is, we're in as much as we're talking about getting the best quality gear you can afford within your budget, or taking inventory of what you already have. Yeah. It's also the placement. I think you used that phrase just a minute ago. Putting some thought into using a tripod, mounting it in a key location, thinking about headroom. Some of the artistic part of video. We've seen people buy hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment and not put thought and tenderness and love into their video production. And when you're able to balance and develop a technique, it really helps to have higher end gear. But it really helps to put some thought into it.
It's amazing.
Well.
It's really amazing what you can do with a simple, DSLR style camera and a really good lens, as a starting point, especially for closer up shots like what we have today. If you put a nice prime lens on a mirrorless camera, you can come away with some absolutely fantastic image quality. But in any case, you want to look at these things. We want to look at high quality video. That could be 1080, could be as much as 4K. Again, that could be a cost limitation, but also knowing your audience. You want to look at how you can leverage delivery of that video with things like adaptive bitrate, and that's where features from your CDN like Wowza can help you, because ultimately viewers are across a big spectrum. Some might be watching it on a 4K TV. Some might be watching it on a smartphone. You never know. So making sure that you have a system in place to accommodate that range is important. And that's, I think we're going to touch on that later, Tim, but that's a big feature of using platforms like Wowza.
Oh yeah, I almost wish if we were in a room with folks, I would say raise your hand if you've ever tried to watch a video in a hotel.
Try producing it,
right? That's when that adaptive bit rate. No, thank you.
The other part, of course, is you want that content to be engaging, to be high quality, and so oftentimes that means bringing an element of mixing, switching, and stuff like that. Single static shots are they're boring. Let's face it, they're not very engaging. They don't catch people's attention. People tune out very quickly. They fall asleep. So we want to have, if we can manage it, have multiple camera shots, have other content we can bring into the mix, and doing that full video production whenever possible. professional audio, and for our friend, a social media director at a church, this is probably the easiest one for most churches because they already have this part. Pretty much all churches I know already have invested significant amounts of money into having really good audio just inside the church. So the good news for those people is you already have it. Just run the main out from your existing audio system into something like a Pearl encoder, and you're done. It really can be that easy. For those who don't have the pre-existing stuff, well, the world of audio is wide. So again, it's maybe looking at what your environment is, the type of content that you're producing, and what's going to help you the best. My personal recommendation to start with, because it can be fairly inexpensive, but is ultimately one of the most flexible options, is to look at using wireless lavalier microphones. They can give you excellent audio quality with minimal extra gear, but the flexibility of the wireless is fantastic. If that doesn't work, if you're someone like me or Tim sitting at home, you're producing content like this, then something like a Blue Yeti. I think both of us are using Blue products, but both different models. They're a great place for someone sitting at a desk and self-producing a lot of content. And then, ultimately, if you need to get a stage of people, but you need minimal gear, look at things like shotgun microphones. Again, audio is a whole world unto itself, and we have covered some of this in previous webinars and other content of ours. So if you're interested in learning more about audio, really going into the details there, check out some of the articles and other webinars we've done. But it's knowing your space, knowing your content, and choosing an audio based on that's going to serve you the best. But the main thing here is the things you will notice that are not on this list are things like earbuds or built-in microphones on laptops, those kind of things, because they are generally not good quality audio. A small investment in a high quality USB microphone like a Blue Yeti or Blue Snowball, I think is what you were saying you're using, Tim, that goes a long way to elevating that. Mm-hmm. But then you're also not far off from using lav mics and stuff like that. So choose what's going to fit your audience.
I'm really glad you chose to address audio as part of our session here, and I think it's important that we recognize, we're speaking in the context of the church social media director, but it also applies to live events in general. It is so frustrating to not be able to hear the content. In some cases, the content audio is more important than the video. When you're talking about emergency response, you're talking about training, you're talking about the message of your EDU or religious institution, those sorts of things. And you've all received the instant message or the nasty email, hey, I would have loved to have been able to enjoy that webcast, but I had my volume on my laptop all the way up. Or half the people don't even know how to do it. They don't know how to find the volume adjuster down by the taskbar. Or, there's a myriad of adjustments that we're used to because we're kind of geeky guys. But when you add a broader range microphone, you get away from those condenser mics on a laptop. You're positioning it. You might not have to turn the volume up as loud. I think that's what I'm trying to say. So it's a great aspect.
It's something we bring up here at Epiphan all the time when we talk about producing good quality content, because there are so many examples out there where the video looks great for a press conference from a really big professional organization, but the audio guy totally blew it, and it's nothing but static and noise and interference, and it doesn't matter how good the visual is at that point. You've lost the audience because the audio is so bad. Weaker video is more forgiving. Yeah. Weak audio is unforgivable. So make sure to invest there. And again, if that means cutting corner on the video a little bit, that's probably okay. But the audio is critical. And
George, can I ask something off script really quick? Does the Pearl 2 have an XLR
It does.
Input
the Pearl 2 has XLR inputs. The Pearl Mini has XLR. and quarter-inch TRS inputs on it. So there's a lot of flexibility in the Pearl hardware to bring in anything. Even a USB microphone could be used on the Pearl hardware. So, depending on the scale of your operation, many churches that we have as customers, again, just to bring that back because Michael brought it up in the chat, but they'll use a Pearl 2. And again, as I mentioned earlier, just take the main out from their existing mixer board and bring it straight into the XLR on a Pearl 2. You already have all of the infrastructure in play. You have already trained your operators on how to get all of that audio in, quite honestly, a very difficult space in many cases. But you've already set it up. You don't need to add anything. You just need to get that high quality audio into a high quality encoder. And this is where the difference between using, sticking an iPad in the back of the room, you can't get high quality audio into an iPad. It's just not. There's some tools that can kind of do it, but ultimately they're not the best at it. So use what you have from high quality audio. If you don't already have it, there's tons of things on the market that you can use. Like we've already mentioned, Tim, you and I are both using Blue USB microphones, but there's other ones. If maybe you don't have one of those, but you already have maybe a high quality XLR mic, there's lots of USB interfaces like the Focusrite products that are great for that kind of thing. Or go buy a small mixer. There's lots of things out there. Mm-hmm. So I just did want to address one question that Michael did bring up, and this is a question we get every single webinar. And is this webinar going to be available for VOD after the fact? Yes, it will be. We always post these webinars as VOD after the fact in case someone can't join us for the entire time. So that'll be available on our website at epiphan.com/webinars. And we do also post them to our YouTube channel as well. So you can find this one and the entire back catalog of all the other ones we've done there. So let me, so you can check that out. There was also a question here on Pearl from Fabian, and I'll address that a little later. So when we talk about that, which is about now actually, as we look at things. So if we have high quality video, we have high quality audio. That's our starting point to make sure that what we're creating is going to look and sound good. But delivering that and adding production to it, that's where our video production systems come into play. And this is going to be the totally not at all shameless plug, but the Epiphan Pearl products with the Pearl Mini and the Pearl 2 are exactly that. They're there to be a standalone, all-in-one production system to take your high-quality video and audio and transform it into a high-quality stream, which you can then deliver through a high-quality platform like Wowza. The idea with a Pearl is take all of the more traditionally individual pieces like a switcher, recorder, streamer, mixer, splitter, scaler, condense it all down into one box that's much, much easier to use, is dedicated to this task, and ultimately will help you deliver that content effectively. So, taking a look at that and making sure that is a cornerstone of your production as well is very important. I'm just getting a note from our producer in the background here, Tim, that there was a slight glitch in one of our streams. So I apologize for everyone to that, but we may just have a small interruption for a second while we resolve that. But we'll get that fixed up. So I apologize if everyone sees a slight glitch, but we will carry on. And in the meantime, we do have a new poll up there asking the question, what are you using for video production now? And is it delivering what you need? Is it hardware, software? These are important things to consider. One of the big advantages we have with the Pearl products as a hardware encoder for this kind of production workflow is you could actually do an end-to-end remotely controlled production with Pearls. So in this diagram kind of represents exactly what we're doing today, where I have a Pearl Mini sitting in my home, which I have my camera and my audio connected to. It's sending an SRT stream to a production Pearl. That production Pearl is also ingesting Tim's stream. And then we're sending that out from that production system into our CDN. So in this graphic, we're talking about using Wowza. Our producer, Cameron, who's hiding in the background, is able to control, and which is how he's able to fix this small technical glitch, which is seeing is now back up and running properly. You know, he can remotely control these elements because of the hardware we're using. He doesn't have to be sitting in my home or sitting in Tim's home, or he can sit in his own house and remotely control these elements. And that's extremely, extremely powerful tools in this day and age. And I think we're seeing a trend of more and more of this remote production happening. And I think even after we're out of this pandemic kind of period, I think we're going to continue to see this be a demand, because it's so much easier. You don't have to have people traveling. It's cheaper, and that's ultimately going to allow people to do more content, which I think is what everyone is trying to accomplish. So, you know, that's a very important part. So the other part of that, of course, is our production system needs to deliver to a reliable CDN. CDN being a content delivery network. Very, very old acronym that probably doesn't mean today what it meant when it was coined. But generally, a CDN, a content delivery network, today means a streaming platform that is ingesting and redistributing a live stream. So I have a bunch of names on this list, but then these are ones people are going to be familiar with: Facebook Live, YouTube Live, Periscope, Twitch for anyone who has kids. Guarantee you know what Twitch is. Vimeo, IBM Cloud Video, things like that. But behind many of these are companies like Wowza that do the real heavy lifting. And Wowza does that themselves and does it extremely effectively and in an extremely high quality way. And that's why we have Tim here today to kind of tell us all about that. So let's
the deep
exactly,
rabbit hole that is a CDN,
exactly.
George. It's I'm glad you brought up the term. We spend a lot of time in modes like this answering the question, what is a CDN? And I think the banners that you put up there, Facebook, Twitch, Wowza Streaming Cloud, and Streamshark, and others, that's exactly what they're doing. They're taking care of that distribution. So it's a term that I think people in the live event business, virtual live event business, should become familiar with, understand the cost of CDN and the capability and, the various nuances. Wowza does, we do boast to have a lot of CDN providers that have used Wowza streaming engine, and that's the logo on the bottom of the slide right now, to build scaled environments. And the reason I mention that is some of them do certain things better than others. We saw Twitch up there earlier, and Wowza has, I believe, powered some parts of Twitch from time to time. But the point is Twitch is basically a video gaming platform, and so they have incredible resolution capabilities. And there's others like Facebook Live and some that have tremendous API integrations. And so don't just think of a CDN as just something you grab off the shelf and shop for the lowest cost option. Look for what you need to do and what you really want to emphasize on for your event.
Features is a big one, and that's when you're shopping for a CDN, that's probably what it all comes down to. And of course, people are familiar with Facebook and YouTube because they're free, and let's be honest, it's pretty hard to argue with that low cost of free. But there's a lot of drawbacks to that as well. It's you can't control the content as well. You're kind of at the mercy of what those platforms do in terms of advertising, and so if you're someone, and I would argue someone MC mentioned in chat here, some real world scenarios, a church, for example, I would argue that if you're a church and, you might have a limited budget, but using Facebook or YouTube, yes, it's free and that makes your budget look good, but you're going to get advertising for who knows what. You're driving people to a platform that is ultimately distracting and is not necessarily, although it's easy and everyone's familiar with it, it's not really that great of a place to have your congregation come together. And that's where using a paid CDN and the features that it can deliver make a huge difference. And Wowza can easily do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to talk about how churches are leveraging these services, because you're right. There is just kind of a, well, it's free, let's use it. But and this is the number one question I've received since the pandemic has started. The issue of streaming church services live to YouTube and particularly Facebook. And the context of the question is content. Churches are using contemporary Christian music or whatever faith they're involved with to kind of enhance their production. And so what happens is it gets downstream into Facebook and YouTube, and they get penalized and potentially suspended, which is hugely a problem. Then you're in a double negative situation. So you don't realize, they don't necessarily say it up front, you're giving your content to Facebook and YouTube. Here it is. It's yours now, and I believe it's in the fine print. Whereas if you're using your own content delivery network, like Wowza, you're not going to have to worry about being penalized. Now, you are responsible to honor the copyright laws in your region and your vicinity. That's another conversation, but it's on you. It's not the CDN having to babysit your stream. And so forgive me for opining on this, but our customers that use the free CDNs for churches need to be very careful with using royalty-free music when possible, using their own content when possible, because it creates quite a problem, and it's not easy to get a black and white answer from the Facebook and YouTubes of the world on this issue. So that's where I strongly recommend using something like Wowza, where again, it's on your own. And I know there's like CCLI, which is a licensing firm. There is the right to rebroadcast certain types of music through your website, and that would be within the framework of what Wowza Streaming Cloud does. You're delivering to your website, not someone else's network. So I hope we get some questions on that. I welcome additional questions, offline if that occurs, but it really does kind of amplify the need for privacy.
Exactly that, because you have the control over it, and again, social media stuff might seem easy, but it might seem free, but at what cost? That's the funniest thing.
Right.
Earlier in my life, being involved with Christian summer camps and things like that, just to print songs in a songbook to sing around a campfire, you have to license that. Live streaming is no different. And the problem with some of it is you can't notify of the license in advance on these social media platforms. Whereas, like you were saying, Tim, with something like Wowza, you have that, and you could put it on your website, and then you embed your Wowza stream onto the exact same page, and you're covered. You got it.
Check this out, George. I have a customer who actually produces professional Christian music, and it's on Spotify, and they own the rights, and they still get penalized for using their own music, because you can't tell that supercomputer in the sky, hey, this is mine. Let's let this one slide. And there simply isn't the ability to do that. Yeah. So it's an issue, and it needs to be taken very seriously, because they have very strict rules, and I can understand that, because if a record label wanted to enter into a copyright litigation or suit, they'd be suing Facebook, they'd be suing YouTube, and they have the deep pockets where it's worth suing them. In another instance, a local church, that's not worth going after. And I'm bordering on getting involved with copyright expertise, which I don't think I have, but I do think it's important to know where you stand in that discussion and be very honorable to the requirements that Facebook and YouTube are under. I think
the other part of that is, exactly what we were saying. The advantage of using something like Wowza is embedding into your own website. That gives you so much more control over what your audience sees, what your audience does. Let's be honest, we've all seen it when you're streaming or interacting on social media. There are these people out there that, for whatever reason, enjoy trolling people. I don't know why they can't find something better to do with their lives, but they do it. And the best way to avoid that is to avoid feeding them. And if you're doing it on your own website with controls that you have in place, you can avoid that very easily. So it is a great way to do that. And embedding into your own website is so much easier using Wowza than it's going to be trying to leverage the social media platforms. And that being said, there's, kind of in this slide that we had up, kind of had two different things. Wowza Streaming Cloud versus a streaming engine. And I've talked to many customers of ours who use both for different reasons. I guess engine, we're really talking about people who need to self-host, self-manage, maybe a large enterprise, whereas on another level, they might lean more towards streaming cloud.
Well, pre-COVID, it was very exclusive to enterprise to host one's own media servers and distribute video to literally thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people on their own private, secure network. But post-COVID, there have been quite a bit of live event producer use cases where they're using an external CDN that's locked down with services we provide, like token authentication. Of course, it's all SSL encrypted. We have the ability to give visibility through our CDN and APIs to IPs that are used. So enterprise is beginning to leverage the Wowza CDN because of the criticality of keeping people informed who are at home now. So it is an interesting discussion, but just to kind of categorize the two, Wowza streaming engine, it'll run on a laptop, it'll run on a Raspberry Pi. It's intended to be run on a server, a Windows or Linux server, and you can literally host your own video on the internet through a hosting provider like Amazon or Google or Azure. It's your own machine that can stream. You can do all sorts of things with it. Recording and DVR and targeting other CDNs if you need to. It's been called, and I don't necessarily love the term, but it's right. True. It's a Swiss Army knife, and it's real technical. There's a Java API, a REST API, a developer. An IT professional can get a hold of it and really do something amazing, and that's where we've really shown over the years. We have a lot of very smart people that have gotten a hold of the Wowza streaming engine and done some great things with it, including building CDNs. But about 6 years ago, we launched Wowza Streaming Cloud because not everybody has a degree from MIT or sits on their computer at night playing around with different configurations. You give us your credit card. You go buy a Pearl 2. You go through some of the steps that George mentioned earlier about audio and video. You take care of the building blocks of a live stream, and you send it to Wowza Streaming Cloud. And that's intended as a turnkey environment where we can secure it, we can transcode it. We'll talk a little bit more in detail later, I'm sure, when we go through some demonstration and testing. But it's really intended for a non-technical person or a generalist, someone who has just some technical acumen to get in and set up a streaming environment, distribute it to your website, and pay for what you use. It's a very versatile, simplified streaming platform, but the cool part of it, right, it's built on our Wowza engine. So it's rock solid. We can support it down to the most granular detail. So it's a great resource for live event pros.
You mentioned secure earlier, and that's another big one. Obviously, security is on everyone's mind. And again, another reason why sometimes social media may not serve on the best we would like it to all the time. Using your own self-managed or paid for CDN like Wowza Streaming Cloud gives you a ton of flexibility. And right now, one of the things that a lot of people are looking towards in terms of adding those layers of security comes from the actual stream itself, from your encoder, like a Pearl, into your platform like Wowza. And one of the ones that's making a lot of noise these days, and I mean a lot of noise, is SRT, which stands for Secure Reliable Transport, is invented by Haivision. And they kind of created this protocol to solve a lot of problems that larger enterprises were running into. But it turns out that when they launched the SRT Alliance, which we'll touch on in a second, they found out there's a whole lot of people trying to solve these same problems. And what SRT can really give us is a low latency stream that is easier to traverse firewalls in a safe way without having to open up all kinds of crazy things, and is secure, can be encrypted with high level encryption, and is point to point, so you're not going to have to worry about people hijacking and all this other kind of stuff, which can happen with some of the older style protocols. So SRT is really positioning to be an excellent option for everyone from the biggest Fortune 500 enterprises all the way down to maybe the lower budget churches who just want to make sure that they are taking advantage of either the low latency or the reliability or maybe the security aspect that SRT can bring to the table. So kind of going over that a little deeper, what SRT kind of looks like is, unlike older publishing methods like RTMP, which is still the dominant one that most platforms and encoders use. And, RTMP has served us well over the past 20 plus years, but it is that old. It's kind of aging out of what we need in a modern context. SRT solves this in a number of ways. And the first one being that SRT has a level of two-way communication. Our main stream data is going out, but then we also have a secondary stream coming back that has diagnostic packet recovery data and gives us a lot of statistics that help us to make sure that we get that reliability. And based on the reliability of that connection, we can take advantage of it and get our latency extremely low. So to use SRT, generally you would have, your high quality video and audio that we've talked about. You would have your high quality video encoder, hopefully an Epiphan Pearl, streaming SRT to your CDN that can accept SRT, which is definitely Wowza, where you can then redistribute it however you need, including transcode it into other formats for your viewers to more easily consume it. This chain is not too dissimilar from the older traditional ways. It's just more reliable and much more secure and can be lower latency. Latency is a big one, and Tim, you and I talked about this chart the other day. A lot of people envision live streaming being zero latency, which, I'm sorry to burst everyone's bubble, is not really real world, but neither is television. So we need to reference it in terms of that. RTMP was not bad, but not great all the time. It could be as high as 30 seconds. And when you're talking about platforms like social media, like Facebook and YouTube, they're definitely at the 30-second plus range typically. SRT on a good connection with good reliability can get you down towards the 80 millisecond end of things. And, again, Tim, you and I are on opposite sides of a continent, and we're both sending SRT into a production environment. We've intentionally increased our latency to make sure that the differentials between our two connections and just the geographics of where I am versus where that production facility is and where you are versus that production facility, we've intentionally introduced about 250 milliseconds of latency to gain the reliability. The funny thing is, when you look at a chart like this, 250 milliseconds is still way lower than you would see with most other protocols, and is way lower than you would even get with typical television broadcast. So even though
it's a quarter second, right, George? That sounds really really
and
short
it is.
to me.
And that's, again, even though we've intentionally put in what is a fairly high number for SRT, it's still a very low number for other stream protocols. And we've only done that to make sure that we've intentionally introduced a level of reliability, and we have the control with SRT to do that. You don't have that with other protocols, and that's really the beauty of it.
Well, one thing I was impressed earlier, probably 10, 12 minutes ago, we have a a back end or a back channel here for messaging during this webinar, and Cameron said he increased the latency between us and you guys because there were some issues. And I thought, how cool is that, right? I mean, obviously we're going across the country. That's not a trivial distance, and we're sending 1080p video at 30 frames per second, and it's going via SRT. And I just thought it was so cool how he could just, Tim's got a couple issues, let's just increase the latency. You have that ability when you're leveraging a really good SRT encoder, and you take the time to practice and learn it. But at the same time, we're still inside a quarter second. I mean, have you ever held two cell phones up to your ears and heard it echo? Basically, I mean, when you talk on a cell phone, I bet you're dealing with it's sometimes even 500 milliseconds. Well,
I remember as a kid, calling family in another country when everything was still running across predominantly the copper cables under the ocean, and you were talking about half-second plus delays on a voice call across the phone. So I mean, yes, we are talking about an incredible amount of data at a very low latency. And I've done this with remote guests joining me from Australia, and I still haven't had to go above 500 milliseconds. So it's a very, very powerful tool here. And again, I mean, that's really the advantage of it. And at the same time, we have all that security and encryption we talked about. So that's great. What we can do with it as well, as we've kind of mentioned a little bit already, is bringing in remote guests with their own SRT feed and mixing those multiple SRT feeds from multiple points into a single production environment and then redistribute it. So in this case, I think this next slide kind of represents it a little bit better to what we're actually doing for today's webinar, where we have, hardware encoders at my home and Tim's home using SRT, feeding into a Pearl 2 that's sitting in our production environment. That Pearl 2 is then sending that stream back out in this case today, not over SRT, but in fact over RTMP into Crowdcast where you guys are watching it. But I could be doing it with RTMP to Crowdcast, with SRT to Wowza, with HLS to somewhere else. Like, we could be doing all of this at the same time from a single Pearl 2. And that's the big advantage of leveraging these layers of the right equipment. And the full chain, and kind of the agenda of today's webinar was start with that high quality video and audio, get it encoded in high quality into maybe multiple layers of production, maybe not, depending on the scale of your operation, and then deliver it extremely high quality. So that's kind of what it looks like, I think.
George, you had a slide up earlier where the Pearl 2, I believe, was representing several rack-mounted units. And I just think it is so cool that you can just push an SRT stream into a Pearl and redistribute it out over. You're using Crowdcast. You can use any CDN. I'm sure you've seen it. I was doing a consultation for a very large company on how to improve their live event streaming, and they had thoughtfully used 15 laptops to facilitate a source from each laptop, and they did it thoughtfully and it worked. But there was a part of me that's like, I said it very respectfully, but I was thinking to myself, you're actually using 15 laptops set up on an 8-foot folding table. And, and I know that's kind of an extreme case, but recognizing that one unit with one plug going into the 120 volt and one Ethernet cable can handle all of these things coming in, and you can literally facilitate a live event production right there. Unless I'm mistaken. I mean, that's remarkable concentration and
no,
optimization,
absolutely. And again, that's the advantage of choosing a high quality hardware encoder like a Pearl. So it's definitely a big advantage going that way. Because when you say 15 laptops, all I hear about is 15 points of failure imminently. Oh yeah. It was, and again, they hadn't been exposed to in the encoder world. They hadn't been exposed to a lot of the the things we've learned through mistakes and just being in the streaming industry. But that's kind of a piece together solution. It's just important to recognize that things have gotten a lot better. So when we pull back again a little bit on SRT here, and this is one we have seen this exact layout, maybe not necessarily with Pearl all the time, but we have seen it quite a bit, and maybe not always necessarily with Wowza, but the general flow of this when we pull back is your source, your video, audio, encoder, streamed into your production system, wherever that may live, through your CDN and then out to your viewers, your ultimate players. You have the reliability, you can have remote control in here, you can have all kinds of different things. How this looks or how it can be leveraged, we've already seen some pretty amazing examples of this in this pandemic environment. One of which was the NFL draft. They did this crazy workflow with all these multiple points because they couldn't do the in-person event. Normally these professional sports drafts have these massive, huge stadium filled with people, huge spectacle. They couldn't do it due to COVID restrictions, smartly. And so they said, well, how do we do this virtually? And they leveraged SRT with what High Vision was able to build off of and do all these other things. They had 600 live feeds that they were able to aggregate and leverage and use. I mean, this was amazing. This was a huge, huge success. And at the same time, because they were using SRT, it was all secure and low latency and all of those other things we've already talked about. So this was a big one. Another one we've seen has been with NASA using it as, a site to site from, different control rooms in different locations. Most people, I think, are aware that, launch in Cape Canaveral versus mission control in Houston, those are not that close together. And you need to have good communication between those sites. And they've started to leverage technologies like SRT between these different sites and between SpaceX, which has their own control centers, to make sure that all that communication is happening in ultra low latency and extremely high quality. So we've seen a bunch of that as well. And I think we're going to see more and more of that. So Tim, I don't know if you had any examples from the Wowza side of some of the use cases you guys have seen, but these are ones we've seen that have been really exciting and pretty high level ones, admittedly.
Well, the high-level ones are always exciting. The big marquees. One that's touched the heart closely was a medical imaging firm I worked with latter part of 2019, where they were they have an initiative to help infants that are in the ICU in developing countries, and we worked with them to create a very small form factor encoder, and it was able to produce an SRT stream ultra low latency that we were able to get to a bank of Wowza streaming engine servers, and they're learning to scale each patient, which is a baby, being watched, and they have machine learning. They're watching how often the baby is touched, how often the baby is fed, etc. And it's kind of, I agree, it's not a huge marquee, NFL use case. We have plenty of those, but this one just came to mind when you put me on the spot here. They're using it to save lives, George, and it's remarkable how SRT, because of that reliability, because of the ability to maintain a low latency, they can centralize all of this information and have doctors giving advice to nurses thousands of miles away overseas to save lives. And we're talking about situations where there's no doctor in the area. There's a huge infant mortality rate, and they're going after it through technology. So it's fascinating to see how, NASA alludes to it. These are mission critical, no pun intended, mission critical streams. At the same time, there's security and surveillance. There are compliance, there's enterprise, there's all kinds of really important streams that need to be secure. They need to be stable. And we have become desensitized to the remarkability of talking to people across continents, overseas, on the other side of the world. We're having a casual conversation, George, over SRT. And so far, so good. And I just can't emphasize enough that not only is it an entertainment, a broadcast, for sports and media and the like, but it's also something that is, can extend infrastructure literally to the other side of the world. So that's one case that I'm very proud of. But I have seen it most tremendously used, and I really resonated with the contribution to a live event, where you were using the Pearl Mini, sending SRT into a Pearl 2, that particular contribution stream, because, everyone from, our favorite person right now, the church social media director, the media producer in a church, but, with network constraints, you don't always have 1 gig up and down on fiber at your local church down the street. But it's the same thing if you're an executive and you're stuck at home because of COVID restrictions. You can use SRT across your DSL. There's a tremendous capability there. So I'm seeing it as an infrastructure extension. And I think it's being very widely used.
And I'm really glad you brought up a medical use case, because I'll be honest, those are my personal favorite ones. And here at Epiphan, we have many medical customers as well doing very, very similar things with Pearls, again, bringing in all this equipment that has video signals. And when you have video signals and you bring it into the right equipment, you can live stream it and you can record it. But one of the barriers historically has been the security aspect of things. And as SRT comes out with the low latency and the security, it's going to allow this to happen more and more and more. And like you said, Tim, in not too light of terms, save lives. And those are the ones that I'm always particularly proud of to be involved in or exposed to. And one of the great things I think about SRT as well is the SRT Alliance. So when Haivision created this, they created the SRT Alliance, which is a membership of companies from all kinds of different avenues coming together to say, we're all using this. We're all going to play together. They literally host events to play together and, make it all work. And there are over 300 members of the SRT Alliance. And this is just one snapshot of some of the membership. But some of the names you'll see on here, Wowza and Epiphan, are part of this graphic, of course, as we are both members of the SRT Alliance. And Wowza was a very early founding member, if memory serves. But there's some other great companies on here. Some of the companies on here make cameras that stream SRT directly, so that if you're looking to buy a camera and just have that go directly to a Pearl that's somewhere else or directly to Wowza, you can do that. There's decoders in here, so that if you want to decode some of this stuff into another, system, there's a ton of different companies in here. And the strength of the Alliance is, and I'm not kidding here, literally get together periodically and say, hey, I've got this thing that's doing SRT now. Let's plug them together and see what happens. And this is the kind of collaboration that sadly is not always that common in the tech industry. And that's one of the things I think I love about the SRT Alliance the most, is that there's this open agreement between all these companies, some of which compete with each other, but to say, let's try it. Let's just see what happens. And it's very cool to see the results.
We call it co-opetition, right? But it is amazing. You mentioned cameras that are beginning to hit the market that support SRT, and some of them support NDI, and they usually retain RTSP and RTMP and other protocols that work. But knowing that a camera can directly connect to a media server or directly connect down into a production environment like Pearl 2, that's removing points of failure in the workflow. On the contribution workflow, because typically if you're using RTSP, you have to open ports, you have to do all kinds of stuff to get a proper connection to like a Pelco camera or an Axis camera. So the fact that that's coming of age, where we'll be able to fixture cameras and stream them into a production environment, I'm personally excited about that, because it opens up opportunity and it streamlines things for departments of transportation, for law enforcement agencies, for people watching their businesses. It's tremendous that if we didn't have that alliance, and it's interesting that I've never actually thought of an alliance. What the definition of alliance? I don't have a dictionary in front of me, but it really does imply working together and supporting one another. Having that industry alliance, there's going to become it's going to birth a lot more innovation and cool products, because developers don't really they don't really care about the business side. They want to
Right.
make cool stuff, right? And they're making cool stuff with SRT.
Yeah,
So it is very
I
exciting.
mean, and although I started part of this webinar talking about how much I dislike smartphone and tablet cameras, but you can get an app for your phone that'll stream SRT if you want. So I mean, there's some cool stuff out there.
Yeah.
Our friends over at Bird Dog they make PTZ cameras, but they're working on their cloud-based control system that leverages SRT as a secure connection, but they're not just encapsulating video data in there. They're putting all kinds of data in there to control those cameras remotely, and it's fascinating. They're sending tally light triggers and all kinds of controls through it because the protocol allows it. RTMP can't do that kind of stuff. So, that's the other reason to see it being really exciting and to see it grow and leverage those things. So I think at that point, and some people had some questions here, but we did have a bunch of polls up as already. One of them asking, have you used SRT yet? Have you brought in remote guests into any of your video productions? Weigh in on those polls, and of course, get some questions in there. I do see one question being upvoted from Dimitri. I'm going to get to that in our Q&A section, Dimitri. But I think for now, we're going to jump into getting our hands dirty, I think, and looking at exactly how we might do things like Pearl to Wowza over SRT and exactly what that setup looks like. We've been showing a lot of paper on what that looks like, but let's show it in our hands. And again, just to reiterate, with doing it on paper, we have our inputs, our sources being encoded with a Pearl. We're going to stream it to Wowza, and Wowza is going to carry it to our viewers, and that could be in potentially a ton of different ways, which is, again, the big advantage of using a CDN, is that you can transform it into whatever formats your viewers need to consume it. So let's dive into a little bit of hands-on. Tim, as the guest, would you like to go first? And I'll stop my screen share here and let you screen share and show us the magic of Wowza. Mm-hmm.
The magic of Wowza. That's no pressure, right? You may, if you've been hanging out with us here on this webinar, you may have heard me compare our Wowza streaming engine with Wowza Streaming Cloud. And what I'm showing you here is Wowza Streaming Cloud. So if you were to have subscribed and you want to create a stream, I'm going to show you how easy that really is. It's intended for you to have a place to direct your video to a professional environment that has all of the equipment. When I say that, there's transcoding, recording, archiving, targeting. We have quite an array of tools here that are all manageable from this portal in which you see right in front of you. So right here, this is what you see when you log in. It's a very simple display of usage data and some processing and viewer data. But what I'm going to do here is actually create a live stream. So I'm going to go to my live stream section here, and I just hit add live stream, and I'm going to call it my simple stream. And one thing that you want to always take into consideration is network. It matters where you're located. I'm located in Northern California, so obviously I would gravitate towards choosing a California location, but I know that the Pearl 2 that's producing this webinar, I believe is located more on the eastern part of the continent. So I'm going to choose US East Virginia, which I know is a very solid location. I'll hit next, and then I'm going to choose where the stream is coming from. These are various encoders who've worked with Wowza to help streamline connecting to Wowza Cloud in the past. You'll see, of course, that Epiphan is there, and they've been working with us for many, many years. But in this case, we're using a new protocol called SRT. So down here on the lower left, you can see I can choose SRT. This is billing. I won't go into that, but we do have pay-as-you-go plans. We have different setups based on how long you intend to stream. And then, again, we can put together a very inexpensive non-adaptive bit rate, but I'm going to choose adaptive bit rate. And if you're not sure what adaptive bit rate is, sometimes it's referred to as ABR. It's when you send in a 1080p stream that may have a large bit rate. It uses a lot of network, and it may be coming in anywhere from 6 megabits per second all the way maybe to 10 megabits per second. And that's great. But at the same time, not everybody can watch that. If you're sitting in a hotel room or an airport lobby, you need to watch it at a much lower rate. So Wowza can real time, without losing any latency, create a 720p stream at maybe 2 megabits per second in standard definition, etc. That's one of the real opportunities you have with using a Wowza CDN is we create that adaptive bitrate ladder for you. And in this case, I know it's coming in as 720 because we talked about this earlier, but it can go all the way up into Ultra HD for 4K. So I'm going to do 720. Creating a VOD stream, it's really cool. When the stream is over, you have an HTTP URL that you can put into a player, and it has access to all those adaptive streams. So you can actually play it back using adaptive later at a later time. And then I'm going to go ahead and record it, which creates an MP4 of the file afterward. We do have a couple of player options. Wowza Player is a player that we've had around for a long time. This is just the 16:9 proportion. It's just the rectangle that plays the video in a web page. So if you're a church social media director, you could drop embed code into your church HTML. Maybe you're using a hosted website, web editor. Usually you can drop that code in there and make it go. We've got some options for overlays and poster images that are fairly standard. And then here I'm creating a test page, my simple
page.
stream.
And if I could type
test
and talk
page.
at the same time,
if I could type,
George, I
and
would
talk
be
at the same
dangerous.
time.
George, I would be dangerous.
So again, I'm just filling out and going back here. And
So again, I'm
myself,
just filling out.
I've
created the stream essentially.
That's it.
There's other conversations we can have.
There's other
based on other features that are in Wowza Streaming Cloud.
Based on other features,
but we're ready to go. And I actually have a stream that's
ready to go. And I actually have a stream.
Maybe we
could,
could,
George. So maybe we could demonstrate how that's connected. Before I stop my share, you can see right here that there's an SRT destination that we've generated for you. So you would copy this, and George is going to do that in a moment, and then a port. So there's some information that once you go through that process, I did. And if you're not blabbing on like I am, it probably would only take you about a minute and a half to do. And then you're able to configure your encoder. So I'm going to stop my share, George, and see if you want to give this a shot on your side.
Essentially, from the Pearl side, it's quite easy. So this is the exact same Pearl that I am using not only to contribute to this webinar, but I created a secondary encoding channel in the same Pearl, which is, again, a big advantage of using Pearls, is I can set up multiple independent simultaneous encoders doing different things. In this case, I'm duplicating the same content between my encoders, but I have knocked it down to 720 to save on bandwidth, since this is just a parallel test. And essentially all I have to do once I've done things like set up my encoding settings, whatever I want on the Pearl, and we know we're doing 720 as Tim and I agreed on earlier. All I have to do for my SRT part is go into the streaming section. I would create an SRT push, which I did pre-create, and essentially in this case we're using caller listener mode. So since I'm sending out, I'm the caller. It's very logical naming. You really can't get this wrong. Wowza's the listener, so I'm the caller. I would copy and paste that URL that Tim gave me, and basically apply and save those settings, and I would click start. Now, if we did this right, I should start getting a counter here. And after a few seconds, the next thing it's going to give me in Pearl, and here again, this is one of the best parts of SRT. It's my favorite part, because as a tech support guy, this part saves people's butts. After a few seconds, it's going to give me statistics. And this is critical, because we all know that troubleshooting streaming is a pain. But I can open up my statistics, and it's going to give me a bunch of information. This is all that back channel communication that SRT grants us. I can get my round trip time. This tells me how long it's taking to get to that server and back. Now, because we went to a Virginia server, and I'm also roughly East Coast in Ottawa, Canada, it means my round trip time to Virginia is about 35 milliseconds. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. Um, I can set things like the latency. I can look at my bit rates being shown there. But one of the biggest things I can look at is what is my packet loss? If I had my latency set way, way down, let's say I was trying to do something really crazy, like below 80 milliseconds, I might start suffering packet loss. But because I have these statistics, instead of just having people complain that the stream looks like crap and yelling about it, I can look at these statistics, which is exactly what Cameron did earlier when we were running into some weird glitches. We can look at the round trip time, we can look at all packet loss, and we can say, hey, my latency needs to go up a bit to make sure I'm recovering gracefully from those packets. So I would bump the latency a bit higher, and you'd look at 0 packet loss. That's unheard of in most live streaming instances. But we can do that because we have the right information and we're using a protocol that can actually recover and manage from this. Now, we are cheating a bit. I'm using a pretty high latency with 720p at a pretty low bit rate. But, if I look at something I was doing for my actual webinar contribution where I'm doing 1080, my statistics, this has been running for almost 45 minutes and I still have 0% packet loss. That's huge. It's huge. So there's a lot of strength here in how we can do that. So at this point, Tim, you should be seeing my stream on your Wowza side, right? So maybe we'll flip back to your share and take a look at that.
Yeah, let's definitely do that. Let me find my window here. And what you see now is what Wowza Streaming Cloud looks like when it's running, which is much more fun than when it's not. Right here, I can see that I'm getting approximately 1,700K in, so almost 2 megabits, which is great. And when George, you talked about troubleshooting video. You can't overemphasize that. That is the most challenging aspect of what we do. When something goes wrong, where's the problem? Well, I like that. I can see it in the Pearl. I can also see it in Wowza Cloud, which gives me a sense of control and visibility. You're sending in an even 30 frames per second, and I'm getting a 60-second GOP, so a 2-second keyframe interval, which makes the packaging process so much more consistent. So when your encoder is strong enough, and I'm emphasizing strong enough because not all encoders are created equal. Obviously, the Pearl's having no problem maintaining a consistent, every 60 frames, it's sending a keyframe. That is very healthy for a HTTP stream, which is what you're watching on a website and typically on a social media feed. So I can see these statistics that are coming in and feel good about what I'm producing. Also, we have the stream health tab here, and it will grow over time. But the two metrics here, one is the frame rate. We're 30 frames per second. It's even and steady. And then I see the keyframe interval that is very steady. If there was a network problem, the keyframe interval may look like this orange line, which is it's variable bit rate, so that's not a problem. But it is, for example, one of the first things I look for when I'm monitoring a live event, and someone calls and says, hey, something's wrong with the stream, I go instantly to this screen and I make sure that I've got stability here and here, and obviously I do. So it's it's nice to know that things are going well, but it's even better to know where to look and what to check when. I'm not using the word if, folks. When something goes wrong. The streaming can be very difficult. When you're using SRT, you're giving yourself an advantage. When you're using something that gives you visibility and logging, like what we see in the Pearl, like what we see in Wowza Cloud, you're giving yourself an advantage. So this is definitely helpful. You don't really get this in all streaming services. I know that Facebook does provide some stream health data. I know that YouTube throws a lot of weird ethereal errors. Like, I don't like your bit rate, and it doesn't really tell you why. And so it's kind of like the having a gauge versus a light on your car when the oil pressure drops. But anyway, it's great to have this ability to troubleshoot. I'll show you the playback in a moment here, but let's say you're a web developer and you want to put George's smiling face in your website. You can grab this code and put it into an HTML player, or actually it will generate the HTML 5 player, but you can put this in your HTML code. So we try to make it as easy as possible to generate the playback, which I may as well just show you here. This is Wowza player, and this is what that embed code creates. And as you can see, even if you're watching it over a scanned stream, you can see that the quality is incredible. And over here, that's that adaptive bit rate I was talking about earlier. There's the source stream, and then the different transcodes that Wowza is creating. I actually put it on 565, so we may see some quality, like George's hair may get a little less recognizable. You might see some quality and color definition drop, but what's most important is the stream is continuous. So that's what you get with the embedded player. If you do want to up-level it a little bit and use a player like JW Player or Theo Player, some player companies are out there that provide ad-serving capabilities, metrics measurement, all kinds of really cool APIs. You can just pull the stream right off of the Wowza CDN and drop it into a much more advanced player. So with Wowza Cloud, you've got the SRT ingest. So you've got that stability that George and I have been talking about here, but you also have the support capability and the ability to integrate it with any streaming component, any streaming player that is out there in the market. So I'm pretty excited. This worked out great. And there we go. Yeah. If you look at the player now, you can see that the quality has definitely dropped. So that's the end-to-end Wowza Cloud.
Yeah,
it worked, George. We did it. A live demo.
Exactly. It's funny. These live demos work better remotely than they used to in person. It's kind of. But
they definitely
anyway,
do.
I hope that gives people some insight into how easy this can actually be. I mean, you'll notice that a lot of that was kind of a lot of copy paste. There wasn't really anything that crazy about it. It was pretty straightforward. Once you know what you're working with, you understand the tools that you have at your disposal, the setup can get really easy. You have all those statistics and metrics for getting that reliability and making sure that everything is exactly where you want it to be, and ultimately your viewers are getting what they need. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that part, Tim. That's I don't get to play with Wowza nearly as often as I would like, but it's always great to see things that are super easy to use. So I think at that point we're going to jump into some questions. Some people did have some questions, so if anyone does have any questions about Wowza, about Pearl, about SRT, throw it in the Q&A. We are going to get to those. I'm going to start looking through some of these here, Tim. And anything that's Wowza, I'm going to throw at you, of course.
You better.
So
you better.
The most upvoted one right now, funny enough, and while we were setting up, we told you this was coming. People are asking, Dimitri was saying here, are you saying that you're using SRT right now to produce this webinar? Do you guys see each other, or do you only hear each other? I believe we see you with a bit of a delay. Yes. So Dimitri, we are using SRT to produce this webinar. Because we're in multiple sites, it is actually easier to run a back channel of audio between Tim and I outside of those SRT feeds so that Tim and I can have a more natural conversation. But the audio you guys hear and the video that you guys see is all being done through SRT into our production stuff, and then RTMP out from our production system into Crowdcast. So we are cheating a little bit. And I think someone else had mentioned something about something similar. Fabian was saying this as well. Is there a way to bring multiple SRT streams into Wowza, do the mix minus and send it back out via SRT and stuff like that? Again, things can get more complicated there. You absolutely can do that. We could be eliminating this back channel portion and do it entirely through SRT with mix minus and all kinds of things. It gets a little more complex. I find that it's better for handoffs. So if I was producing 5 slides and then I was going to shut up and let Tim do it for 5 slides and we were handing off back and forth, that would work great. It wouldn't be a big problem. we prefer to do our webinars with much more natural conversation, the way Tim and I have. So we've chosen to do it this way. But you can do it in multiple ways.
And George, one thing is, we've all become extremely comfortable in some respects. I mean, we may have Zoom fatigue or GoToMeeting fatigue. We're in these conferences all day long. One thing that I appreciate is you send me a Zoom link. I know exactly what to do with it. And I know, we all have our style of conversing on a Zoom call. So I feel like I'm in a Zoom call right now. And that's really important to me. Now, in the background, my camera is actually being split to two sources. It's going to an SRT encoder, and it's also going up to Zoom. But I'm not thinking about the encoder. I'm thinking about what George is going to ask me next, and I'm worried that some of you out there are going to ask me a question I don't know the answer to. So it's really a natural engagement. It's very comfortable for me. And you don't have to use Zoom, right? You could use Blue Jeans or GoToMeeting.
We've done it with literally a phone call. It's I mean,
have
at
you?
the end of the day,
Cool.
right, it's whatever's going to help two people, or maybe more than two people, have a natural conversation. And again, I've participated in some events doing virtual panel discussions, and certainly that really needs some sort of conferencing tool like a Zoom or GoTo or whoever. They're all the same. But again, the quality of audio and quality of video you get from a Zoom or a Microsoft Teams or a WebEx or a GoTo, it's not very good. It's really kind of bad. So the advantage here is that doing our actual video production separate from that in parallel means that I can use a much higher quality microphone than I'm using for Zoom into my encoder for SRT. I can use a much higher quality camera. I'm using the same camera just like Tim is, but if I had different cameras, let's say I was standing on a stage, my Zoom back channel part could be done just with the crappy webcam in my laptop, but the full video production could be a $10,000 camera if I wanted to, and so that everything is super high quality there. So again, some people may feel like it's redundant to run those two separate channels, but it's actually a big advantage in how you can kind of split those things out. So I hope that answered that question, Dimitri. People also did ask in here, if both in chat and his questions, will this be available later? Yes, it's always available on our website, epiphan.com/webinars. So check those out later. But if you stayed with us this long, you might as well see it through to the end. So Fabian also asked her a question here. This one's for me, about Pearl specifically. Is there a way to have an audio output on Pearl, to monitor? So Pearl Mini and Pearl 2 both have headphone jacks. You can monitor audio from your encoding channel directly from it. Although it's intended for headphones, you could run it into another audio system. Otherwise, if you're dealing with a professional audio system, in front of Pearl, a larger mixer, you can of course monitor it there on the board as well. So it really depends on what your workflow is and how you're setting that up. But there are ways to solve it. Again, it just depends on what your workflow is there, Fabian. But send us an email or send us a live chat, and we're happy to kind of send us more details on what your workflow is. We're happy to try and dissect that and kind of give you some options. Of course, just a reminder, people, we do have some polls up there, including asking about, does Pearl Wowza workflow seem like it's something that suits your production needs? Weigh in on that poll as well. Gustavo is saying, what events that are currently live or close to this date would you say are a great example to watch and learn? That's a good question. I'll be honest, I've been so busy outside of Epiphan events, I don't know what's going on in the world most of the time.
Well, you got to pay attention to, there's a lot of nuances. You'll see it in broadcast TV. If you're watching the Today Show in the United States, you'll notice they're leveraging Zoom-like clients if it's not actually Zoom. Keep an eye out for what people are doing. You can get really good ideas by stealing/copying someone else's great work, right? I shouldn't have said that, George. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. I was laughing because the other day I was actually watching news, and I know there are some Canadians watching, but I was watching a clip from Canada's national broadcaster, the CBC, and they had a remote reporter. I've seen some other news agencies in Canada do this as well, and the contrast difference between whether of what they're using. And Tim and I, we had this conversation earlier about AirPods while we were setting up, and one of the remote reporters was from his home, joining through something like Zoom or Skype or whatever it was, and his audio interface was just the AirPods. It was so bad. It was unwatchable because his audio was so bad that, so I was laughing because I think the thing I've learned most from news agencies is what not to do. We've used the example from a few years ago where this expert was invited into a show remotely through something like Skype, and his camera shot had the door to his office in the background, and his kids came bursting through the door. Right? There's all these
wonderful.
There's these best practices when it comes to these things. So even if you do want to go with the Zoom and those things as a contribution, which I don't have a problem with, for one reason, the best practices for those are still get yourself that good quality camera. Like I said, I use a Sony a5100 as my webcam. Run that into a good quality capture card. Epiphan also happens to sell those. Bring that into your Zoom or your WebEx or whatever, because it's going to be way better than the webcam built into your laptop. And get yourself good quality audio like a Blue Yeti. And that's even for how much things like Zoom squash the audio into oblivion. It's still going to be way better than using AirPods or the mic built into your laptop. And Tim, I know that's why you're using the Blue Snowball for the same reason, because, yeah.
The Blue Snowball, fantastic resource.
These basic tools are night and day difference in the quality. Once you start stepping up into other things, we didn't really mention it earlier, but one of the reasons SRT was created was also to try to replace the old school network broadcast satellite truck stuff, because that is expensive. The latency is extremely high, and the quality was not that great. SRT is already replacing that from site to site for television broadcast so that they don't have to deploy a whole satellite truck. And that's where I say it's really interesting that even if you needed a very, very basic level, you could install an SRT app on your phone and have a remote reporter stream SRT from their phone back to the studio. So there's some very, very cool applications there.
George, check this out. I was working with a very large broadcaster right after COVID broke, and they had cameras on the White House lawn, doing news stuff, and they realized they didn't have people back at the studio to do some of these ingests, and so they did exactly what you just described. They shot it up via SRT to a streaming server, and then they were able to get it converted into the format they needed for distribution. And it felt like we were reproducing a satellite truck, and in some ways we were. We don't realize that in this simple open source protocol, we're doing. How much did a satellite truck cost? How much is one of those uplinks
Millions,
cost?
I'm sure.
I have no idea.
Yeah,
it's got to be ridiculous. Yeah. So there's just you guys producing, Cameron, the team there. I'll give you a shameless compliment. You guys do an incredible job in preparation and facilitating and ensuring the quality. The creativity that I'm seeing in crews like yourself and others, it's getting better and better and more interesting and more interesting. I don't think all the good ideas have been discovered yet, but I do think that leveraging some of these products that are within arm's reach, people are going to get better at it. And I think you're right, George. I think live events are going to be here, whether live virtual events are going to be here, whether we all go back to rubbing elbows again or not. It really is an amazing, creative, and effective way to communicate, and it's kind of fun to be a part of it.
It's a lot cheaper. And at the end of the day, no matter who you are, what size your business is, everyone's trying to save money. It's so, this is the time of year where either right around now or very close to now, Tim, you and I would be looking at flights to get over to Amsterdam for IBC, which is where we last saw each other in person a year ago. those kind of events, they're still not going to happen for a while. And trying to pivot even those kind of events virtual, I haven't seen anyone nail it yet, but we're getting close. And these kind of tools are getting us closer and closer to that. So
Yep.
it's really exciting to see how that's going to go. So, well, that pretty much answers all the questions we had queued up. If anyone has any other questions, you have about 10 seconds to throw them in there. Otherwise, I want to thank everyone very much for watching, and thank you, especially Tim, for joining us today. If you want to learn more about Epiphan and Epiphan Pearl, of course, check out epiphan.com/products. You can send us an email to info@epiphan.com. And you can also, if you want to learn more about Wowza and everything that they do, which is a lot and fantastic, wowza.com, and you can get in touch with Wowza there as well. And Tim and his team are happy to help you.
Thank you, George. It's been great to be with you today. I enjoyed the conversation. I look forward to hearing from anybody on anything we spoke of here. It's fun to be in a fun space, and doing this kind of stuff, getting to actually use our equipment for its intended purpose instead of just testing stuff is fantastic. So I've enjoyed the time, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Tim.
It's been wonderful.
Appreciate it as always. So thanks everyone for joining us. And of course, we have lots of these webinars we've been doing since the beginning of March. This actually kind of marks essentially 6 months this week of all this craziness for many of us working from home. And so it's an interesting week to think back about that. But we've been doing webinars pretty much every week since we started working from home about a ton of topics. So check out epiphan.com/webinars. We also have continued to do our weekly Thursday live show live at Epiphan, which we do at 3 o'clock Eastern every single Thursday, discussing all kinds of topics. And I believe tomorrow's episode is all about doing, again, remote production stuff, but really dressing it up by doing chroma keying and things like that remotely. And how, again, you can just improve the looks of your remote productions through tools that are available. So we're going to chat about that tomorrow. Join us 3 o'clock Eastern live at Epiphan. And as always, follow, like, subscribe, all those socially things. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Tim, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.